Inside the Birds is back. What's up, everybody? It is Geoff, Mosher, and Adam Caplan with, of course, Greg Cosell as we finish off our four-part NFC East Preview Series. Do you know, Greg, why we do this in four parts?
I think because there's four teams.
Awesome. We're done with this podcast. It was great. You're a mathematician. We're done now.
Wow. It seemed to make sense.
It does. And it's not the Cardinals any longer. So that's always good. But we're going to preview. Yeah, we're going to preview the Philadelphia Eagles here. We always save the best for last. The Eagles are the reigning NFC East champions. And listen.
Well, they're the reigning NFC champions, too.
NFC champions as well. Yeah. This is a divisional preview. But I wanted to say NFC East. I have a specific reason I point the Eagles out as NFC East reigning champions. I'll get to that in a second. I want to remind everybody, Inside the Birds is presented by Ocean Casino Resort, the exclusive Jersey Shore resort of Inside the Birds. That's Ocean Casino Resort in Atlantic City. Not since 2003/2004, Greg and Adam, has a team or a franchise been able to repeat as champions of this division. Do you guys all remember what you were doing in 2004? I mean, my gosh, I had a lot less gray hair. I tell you that.
No.
It's a long time ago. So,
more or less 20 years ago.
Yeah, my math tells me it's a couple decades now. So, almost. So, can the Eagles repeat? Can the Eagles battle the ghosts of this division? They certainly have a good 53, but isn't that amazing? Like, let's just take a second. Greg, this has not necessarily been the greatest division in football for the last 2 years, and yet nobody has been able to repeat as champions. That to me it's almost staggering when you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of those things. I'm not sure where to go with that, Geoff. But I mean,
you mean the tape doesn't show you why that happens?
It's just surprising. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think, and this is our last one, but to me, it's an intriguing division. I mean, I know the Eagles are in the Super Bowl and they're still obviously really good. That's not the point, but I think the other teams are interesting. When I say we talked about Dallas, really good 53-man roster. We've talked about the Giants, who are certainly an ascending team. And again, no one knows what the records are going to be. We're doing this early July, so we don't know. And a lot of things happen through training camp in the course of the season. But wouldn't we all agree that the Giants appear to be more ascending than descending at this point?
Got a roster. They've got a lot of players.
Yeah. And Washington, they've got some questions because they're going to play a young quarterback. So you have no idea how that plays out. But they don't have a terrible roster either.
Nope.
In fact, I believe last year, Greg, there was a period in the middle of the year where Washington started to win a few games and get themselves back into it behind Tyler Heineke. And there was a point last year where if the season ended today, I think all four NFC East teams would have been in position to qualify for the playoffs. Now, Washington slipped a little bit at the end, but as we noted in part one of our series, that's another team that looks to be more ascending than descending and has a lot of great defensive talent, and we'll have to see. But it's not the NFC East anymore, Adam, right? I mean, no. we joked about this division, and it's amazing that when it was the NFC East for quite a while, you still couldn't get a repeat champion, but it's going to be tough for the Eagles.
Yeah, this is the best division looks, at least on paper, in years. I mean, yes, every team has questions, and even the Eagles do. They're down a minimum of 7 starters from last season, so that we'll get into that. But yeah, just overall, Washington's roster is better than last year, but they made a change of quarterback. The Giants have added a bunch of receivers. They had to do that. They feel they're getting some offensive linemen back who were hurt last season. And Dallas might have the best overall roster. That doesn't guarantee you anything, but on paper, they have a very good roster.
So let's talk, like we've done on a lot of these teams, about the new philosophy that might be in place, or at least the new coordinator, and that for the Eagles will be Brian Johnson, who goes from quarterbacks coach to offensive coordinator, and then Alex Tanney is now the quarterbacks coach. I don't know how much to make of that. I mean, we've seen instances where that kind of an impact can be very, very positive, very negative. We've seen instances where it's kind of business as usual. Greg, what do you expect from the Eagles offense with a new play caller? Anything different?
I think the philosophy will be 100% the same. The only thing that will change, and this is always incredibly hard to know, even for someone who watches tape like I do, because, I'm not just studying the Eagles and I can't watch the Eagles game for 10 hours. The only thing you won't know until it happens is specific play calls in specific situations. But the overall philosophy of the defense, the approach they take with Jalen Hurts, because he's obviously a very good player, but a specific kind of player, that's not going to change. Now, there'll be a couple of changes with some people around him. Obviously, at right guard, they'll have a new starter. It'll be interesting to see what happens at slot receiver. But for the most part, and clearly running back, obviously, and we need to mention that, and we'll get into more detail here. But I think the overall offensive approach will not change. They may expand a few things just because you have a smart young quarterback who's continuing to grow in the game. But philosophically, Geoff, no, you're not going to, they're not going to be running the air raid offense this year, Geoff.
There you go. The one thing that jumps out to me, and I want to get both your guys' opinions on this, unless you're like Tom Brady, unless you're one of the greatest to ever play the position where you are consistently all pro year to year to year, I've always found that there's like a significant population chunk of the NFL players who have these great years, unbelievable years. It's hard to replicate that. So when you're coming off your best year and now you're being asked to do it again or even better, only a select few can do that. And I bring that up because Jalen Hurts really made such an extraordinary jump last year, and his numbers are so jarring from last year.
But the pass game numbers weren't. It's not like he threw 40 touchdown passes.
No, I'm talking about more the passer rating, though, the efficiency, the
efficiency. He played at a really high level.
The deep ball. Go ahead.
I don't want to jump ahead of you, but we need to get into the reasons why. Obviously, should I go into that now? I don't want to jump ahead of you.
Go for it.
Okay. I think the one thing that was that the film really showed and was often overlooked, and I've talked about it with you guys through this offseason, but now that we're talking Eagles, it's obviously worth repeating because it's so critical. The run game element that Hurts brings is so critical to what the Eagles do and how it impacts defenses. See, that's the big factor, because when you have a quarterback who's in the gun 99% of the snaps, okay, and with an offset back who can either be offset to the weak side or the strong side, and that's a big factor, by the way, that dictates how the defense has to line up, because Hurts can run the ball on any given play with a design run. So you need a body for Jalen Hurts. Normal run games, even if they're great, like Tennessee for, these years with Derrick Henry. Great run game, no question. But the quarterback is not really a factor in the run game. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to account for Ryan Tannehill as a runner. Defenses have to account for Jalen Hurts as a runner, and that dictates how they have to line up, particularly at the second and third level of the defense. And so what that does is it allows the Eagles' pass game to really become more effective because they know how the defense must line up. And this is going to be fascinating this offseason because this is what teams are going to be studying all offseason, particularly the division teams, but even the teams that play the Eagles early in the season. Belichick in New England, he is studying this Eagles offense with a fine-tooth comb to figure out how you have to line up to play all this. I mean, that is so important. And what it does is it allows the Eagles pass game to be incredibly efficient without being incredibly detailed. So the pass game can be, I would never use the word simple. Nothing in the NFL is simple, but they don't have to have a 300-page playbook with their pass game because they know how the defense has to line up to deal with Jalen Hurts as a runner, and it just allows the pass game to be so incredibly efficient. I watched the Eagles tape with someone about 2 weeks ago, a guy who was a coach and now does other things, and we were watching, and you see the same kind of plays all the time, but because they run them so well and they know what they're getting, so they're just incredibly efficient.
So let's also talk about his deep ball accuracy.
That improved because that's
something you can tangibly say isn't about the numbers, right? It's not about the advantage you have in the numbers game by the ability to run. That was just Jalen Hurts making an unbelievable improvement from.
But you do get the one-on-ones on the outside because of this.
Well, that's true, but you still got to put it down.
The one-on-ones with two big-time receivers, A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. That's the thing.
Right.
But Hurts was really precise with his ball location on those deep throws. That's where he improved so significantly. I mean, he made some unbelievable throws down the field. I mean, there's no getting around that. He
Right.
was really precise with his ball location on what are not easy throws.
So
yeah, and I'm just
ahead,
going to add, Geoff, I'm just going to add this. The thing that I was so impressed with Hurts is, because we know what happened in 21. They came out trying to be a throwing team, and Sirianni's first year didn't work, so they became a running team, which is very rare to do inside a season, but it worked, certainly worked. We know that Jalen will run. But the thing that you and I saw, Geoff, in OTAs last year, we were like, wow, okay, they're going to start throwing the ball more. Now, per game, they're still under 31 attempts per game, but obviously when you get a lead in most games, you don't have to throw the ball a lot. But they still will come out throwing, and they're very aggressive with Jalen, and that's the big jump. Geoff, you asked earlier, how's this offense going to change with Brian Johnson? I don't think it's going to, and I agree with Greg. But here's the way I see it. They're still going to be very aggressive throwing the football. Those two receivers with a stud tight end, Geoff, it's not changing. They're still going to be extremely aggressive.
All right. So if there's one area maybe where we see some evolution to this offense, which might be natural or just to not be stale, is throwing to running backs more, which I think we'd all agree they may have the ability to do more because of the personnel that they have. Now, we made a joke about in our Dallas podcast about you can't talk about guys that you don't know who's making a team yet. And you kind of feel that way about Eagles running backs because there's going to be some interesting competition here. But regardless, the opportunity there, Greg, do you see the opportunity with DeAndre Swift added in and Kenny Gainwell in year 3 for them to get the running back more involved in the passing game?
I do. And the one thing, again, none of us know this. I'll just throw something out, which could happen or could not happen. It's very possible because of Hurts, again, that you could see more empty sets because both Swift and certainly Gainwell can be split out as receivers and run routes like wide receivers. So, and again, that forces the defense to have to expand and widen horizontally. If they want to pressure, that forces them to declare. So Hurts, who's becoming smarter and smarter as he further develops, he would see that. So that's something you could see more of. That could be an expansion of their offense, more empty sets to see how defenses respond to that. Again, because you're doing a lot of stuff to see how defenses respond.
Right.
And then you get a book on, hey, this is how they're responding to what we do. And now we know that, hey, we can now do this. So that's something you might see. Again, I don't know that for a fact, but just thinking tactically about football, I think you could see that. Because Gainwell is a terrific receiver, and Swift's a very good receiver as well.
It's funny because Adam and I have talked about maybe Jalen Hurts' next step becoming just taking that check down a little bit more when the opportunity is there, and now you have guys who can make something of a check down. But if you go back to last year, A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith caught so many balls in one-on-one situations that it's hard to blame the quarterback for saying, who cares if he's got covered? I put it up there, he's going to get it, and having faith in the guy to make the play 40 yards downfield instead of 5 to 10 yards down the field.
It's a matchup league, and when you get one-on-one, you throw to no coach is going to say, hey, bad decision if you throw when it's man coverage to A.J. Brown or Devonta Smith. No coach is going to say that's a bad deal.
Right.
It reminds me of a conversation I had, years ago with Troy Aikman. He said, when you have man coverage and you throw to the one-on-one, he says, if the receiver doesn't win, that's not the quarterback's fault. Fans think it is. Then fans say, "Oh, he forced the ball." He said, "No, then you need new receivers."
Wow.
And the Eagles, they've got 2 big-time receivers on the outside.
Yeah. Your thoughts on Olamide, Zaccheaus, and the competition in the slot there?
That's what's going to be interesting to me. Again, the reports were, and you guys could respond to this better than I, the reports were that they were happy with Quez Watkins this offseason. Now, again, it's offseason, so we don't know what that means. They're not going to come out and say, boy, he had a terrible offseason. Right. No team says that about a player. But Olamide Zaccheaus is a very interesting guy. He's small, he's quick, he's got some vertical ability. He's not as explosive as Watkins, but he'll work better in the short to intermediate areas. I think that's a little bit of a competition. And when I say competition, again, we don't know what it means in terms of number of snaps for each guy, and it could be situation specific, which a lot of things are. But they didn't sign this guy to play 5 snaps a game. And he's had some moments with the Falcons who were not a passing team, so he's a local kid too. I think he went to St. Joe's Prep. Yep. So, I thought that was a really interesting signing because I'm pretty familiar with him, and he's a pretty interesting player.
Well, I know Jason Avant brought up one area to watch as a caution is how well the Eagles will be able to run out of 11 personnel, because he felt Zach Pascal was such a good blocker out of 11 personnel in that spot whenever they wanted to run with Pascal in, as opposed to having Lamade or even Quez Watkins in there now.
That's a great point. Jay makes a great point there, because, a lot of times, in the league, you do run to your slot, and because you have a slot corner there who's not the same as a big defender, and you need your slot receiver to be a pretty good blocker. Now, they have to work all this out. This is what you work out through the offseason.
All right. One last thing on the offense, then Adam, you can go with one. There was a signing that I did not criticize the signing, because you need to have this kind of player. And what I've been skeptical of is the quality of the player, and that's their backup quarterback in Marcus Mariota. I get it. I think you need a backup quarterback. You lost Gardner Minshew. He probably can run the offense a little bit, your original offense better than Gardner can. But you watched Atlanta last year, Greg. I wound up watching a little bit of their tape last year because they were playing similar opponents to the Eagles. And I thought that Mariota, even when protected, was really off the mark a lot. What did you see from Mariota last year?
Yeah, he's been an interesting guy in the league. He was obviously his second pick in the draft the year he came out, playing in Chip Kelly's offense at Oregon. Threw to a lot of wide open receivers in college. Good size, doesn't throw a bad ball, not a gun, but decent arm. Accuracy has always been a little erratic, a little inconsistent. But I think the point you made, Jeff's the right one. If you have to put in your backup quarterback, you prefer not to have to change your offense. You prefer not to. There are teams that do, just because of who's out there. But Mariota can run this offense.
Mm-hmm.
He can run the football. He's not as big and powerful as Hurts as a runner, but you can design runs with him. It would remain to be seen whether defenses would respond to him the same way they respond to Jalen and how they line up. But he can run. You don't have to go into a whole different section of your playbook as you did with Minshew if Hurts were to get hurt. And that's the reason. And Mariota's been, he hasn't been terrible. He just hasn't been quite good enough to be a consistent quality starter in the league.
Definitely. This might go without saying or sound obvious. And Jason Avant made this point too. I'd almost rather have to adjust my offense for a good backup quarterback who could win me a game, instead of keeping the offense for a backup quarterback that I'm not sure can win me a game. Now, I'm not saying Marcus Mariota can't step in and win the Eagles a game. Maybe he very well can.
He's won games in the league. He's been in the playoffs.
He has. There's something about watching him last year. If they had signed him at this time last year, Greg, you wouldn't hear this from me, but just watching him last year, and maybe he just didn't vibe with the coaching staff. I don't know what it is.
Well, he was with a coach who coached him in Tennessee, so
right.
It's not as if he was with people who didn't know him.
Yeah, there was just something there that it was really, he was a tough. How your favorite expression, that was a tough watch for me.
Yeah, he's been at times. He's been at times, but he's also played a lot of games, has a lot of experience.
Yeah,
is a great kid, and you can line up and play with him if you have talent around him, and the Eagles have talent.
Yeah, he did kill the Eagles, by the way, about 4 or 5 years ago. Avonte Maddox's first year. Yep. Corey Davis. Yeah, he had a great game that day.
Yeah, no, he's had that in his career.
Yeah. All right, good stuff.
So offensive line, Greg, we know Lane Johnson's back, Kelsey, Mailata, and Dickerson, but the big issue is at right guard.
Right guard.
And we've seen this over the years. Some teams will do this. If a tackle doesn't have long enough arms, 33 and a half, 34, 35, they move them inside. Let's give us some thoughts here on Tyler Steen, who's clearly the favorite, hasn't won it yet, but clearly the favorite to win the right guard job.
I like Tyler Steen's tape a lot at left tackle at Alabama. He's a 4-year starter in the SEC because he transferred from Vanderbilt. Obviously, it was the arm length that made people feel he's not a guard. He's not a tackle. I personally think he's going to win the job. I like him a lot. I think his size and his movement stylistically, okay, I don't want people to say I'm saying he's exactly this guy, because you know how you guys know how it is when you make comparisons. That's all people hear. Oh, Cosell thinks he's this guy. Well, no, I think stylistically, okay, I think stylistically there's some similarities to Barrett Brooks. And keep in mind, Barrett Brooks was not a first-round pick.
Brandon Brooks or Barrett Brooks?
Brandon Brooks, excuse me.
Okay, yeah, Brandon. Okay.
That's what I thought you meant.
Want to make sure.
Yeah, Brandon Brooks. Yeah, and because Brandon Brooks was not a first-round pick. So, and Steen was a third-round pick, because a lot of people believed that he would have to change positions. But his tape was very good in the SEC at left tackle against obviously quality players in the best conference in the country. Again, as I said, I'm not saying it's a 1-to-1, but I think that this kid could be a really good guard. I really do.
By the way, you just made Barrett Brooks's day. If this gets back to him, he's going to be really, really excited about it.
What number was Barrett?
I see Barrett all the time. I'm going to joke with him about it. But no. I want to ask you though about size specifically there, Greg, because Cam Jurgens might be a very good athlete, and he's battling Tyler Steen, but I think, who was it? Was it Brian Baldinger I spoke to about this? And he was saying, Jason Kelce's an undersized center. Do you really want an undersized guard next to an undersized center when you have to block a guy like Dexter Lawrence, right? Or Mozzie Smith, a 330-pound guy? That stuff really factors in.
I would think so. And keep in mind, as most people know who probably listen to this, Jurgens went to Nebraska as a tight end and had to bulk up just to become an offensive lineman. So he's not going to get to 325. Now, that doesn't mean he's not strong. From what I've heard, he's a very strong kid. He's an athletic kid. But, your point is a good one, Geoff. Even if he gets up to 305 or 308 or whatever he is, I don't know what he is, but, his body can't take much more than that.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, Sam Aller was not huge either, but he was so strong. That was the rare part of his game.
Sam Aller was like 6. Yeah, he was about 6'3", though. I mean, he was
6'3". Yeah.
Yeah, he was not. Yeah.
And he dropped weight over the years. He was much heavier when he first started with club in 60 when he first was drafted. Then he got himself into really good shape. But yeah, it's interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing this how this battle works out. And then who are the key backups, and we'll learn that as we go along in training camp.
And how about the sort of Grant Calcaterra fighting with Dan Arnold? I mean, you've watched Dan Arnold with some other teams. Do you think he can come in here and sort of knock Calcaterra out the number 3 spot?
I don't know. That's fascinating. Arnold's always been a really good receiver throughout his career. That's what he is. He's not really a blocker. He's certainly not an inline blocker. That was a really interesting signing to me, because I like Grant Calcaterra. And for those who remember, he was at Oklahoma. He looked like the next guy at Oklahoma. And then I think due to some injuries, including concussions, he took a year off and then came back at, was it SMU? I can't.
Yes.
Yeah. Because I watched his tape and then I remembered him and said, yeah, this guy's pretty athletic. And he had a few moments last year. I remember he caught a 40-yard pass on a crosser. I forget who that was against. They do like Jack Stoll. I think Stoll's probably clearly the number 2. So you're fighting over the number 3 tight end. I don't think they're going to keep 4. So that's an interesting battle right there, assuming no one gets hurt.
Right. And of course, you have Tyree Jackson trying to fit into the mix as well.
Yeah.
And the uniqueness of him being 6'6" and a former quarterback. So obviously a lot of depth with the Eagles, offensive line, wide receiver, tight end. Let us get into the defense in a minute, which has been rebuilt here on the fly. First, we'll remind everybody to check out our friends at phlsportsnation.com. They're enhancing the fans' experience with their coverage of all Philadelphia sports teams. For the fan, by the fan is their motto. So make sure you check them out at phlsportsnation.com and on Twitter at phlsportsnation. Also, it's Ocean Casino Resort's 5th birthday this summer, and they can't wait to celebrate with you. Join Ocean for exciting promotions and sweepstakes, headline entertainment, the best day life and nightlife lineup in AC, the debut of the birthday bar, exclusive local collabs and partnerships, commemorative 5th birthday merchandise, and so much more. Don't miss stunning fireworks and unique events all summer long. Ocean Rewards members will enjoy over $5 million in gifts and prizes, so be sure to sign up for an Ocean Rewards card to get in on the fun next time you visit. Now let's pause to hear a word from some other great sponsors, including our friends at Sky Motor Cars.
Sky Motor Cars in Westchester is a different sort of dealership. All it takes is one look at their Highline pre-owned vehicles that people all over the country want and need. Owner Brett Schulter makes sure you don't spend a dime of your money before you purchase the car. Sky Motor Cars allows you to make all the decisions regarding your next vehicle. At Sky Motor Cars, you never have to spend more than necessary. Visit SkyMotorCars.com today or call 610-918-7225.
And if you hop into Sky Motor Cars out there in Westchester, PA, make sure you tell them Adam and Geoff sent you. You will get a great deal. Well, Greg, there's always a time that a franchise has to turn the page a little bit. And for the Eagles on defense, they had to do that. They lose Javon Hargrave, a real staple of their pass rush for the last 3 years. In free agency, they lost both their safeties, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson and Marcus Epps.
Yep.
They both lost both their linebackers in Edwards, TJ Edwards and Kaiser White. So they have rebuilt the middle of their defense. Most people know the names. We'll get to them in a second, but just in general, is this the biggest question mark of the Eagles right now? The middle of their defense?
Well, I think it's the linebacker and safety position because they'll be essentially new players. I mean, Blankenship obviously played a number of games last year, and I thought he played well. And it would not surprise me if he's one of the safeties at all. But obviously, he was not a true starter a year ago. He played because of injury. So, it's a bit of an unknown. I mean, obviously, they drafted Nakobe Dean in the 3rd round. A lot of people felt maybe he should have gone earlier. His college tape was good, although Georgia has a couple linebackers now who are better prospects than Nakobe Dean. But they're counting on Nakobe Dean to step right in and be a quality player. Morrow has been a good player in this league. A lot of people might not be aware of him, but he started for a number of teams in this league. Probably he's coming off his best season a year ago in Chicago. He's an athletic guy. He's really athletic. He's almost built a little bit like a safety, but
he was in college.
Yeah, exactly. You could almost say that just like Kaiser White, who was a safety in college as well. So, but those are still question marks. And then you keep working down the middle and you get to the safety position. So who's going to start? Obviously they signed Edmonds to a 1-year deal. He's a certain kind of player. They drafted Sidney Brown in the 3rd round, who I believe they love, but they know he has some things that clearly need to be worked on. I think in an ideal world, they would love for him to become a starter. Now, that may not happen week 1 or week 2, but my sense is they drafted him to be a starter in the context of this kind of defense where, he's not going to play a ton of deep safety, although he did a bunch of that at the Senior Bowl. And a lot of teams felt like, hey, because of his straight line speed, that he would have the range if he had to play on the back end, which he did not play very much at Illinois. He was predominantly a box safety. He needs to be taught, which they know, how to tackle. He does not know how to tackle. But he's physical. So you start there. He's physical, he's intense, he's aggressive, he's highly competitive, he's got great straight line speed. But there are some things that are, question marks, which is why he was a 3rd round pick.
Sure.
Let's move to the front, because when you look at it, obviously we mentioned Hargrave is gone. And now without his ability to get to the passer, we know you like Jalen Carter. There's a lot of people.
Yeah, I think everybody liked Jalen Carter.
Right.
That was not the issue.
And we don't control what happens off the field. We'll just stay on the field here.
Yeah.
What kind of pass rusher could this guy be, Greg?
Really good, because he's both quick and he's physical and strong and powerful. So Jalen Carter, to me, just from an ability standpoint, has all-pro ability. Now, that doesn't mean he's going to be an all-pro this year, but those are the traits that he brings to the table. So Jalen Carter, barring anything unforeseen, is going to start. He's going to play. It's not going to be, let's ease him in. He's going to play. His talent level is too high not to play. I would imagine, the question is, when they're in their base front, let's say it's that they're 5-2, okay? Their base front, where they've got 2 linebackers, Morrow and Dean, assuming it's those 2 guys, playing linebacker, and they're in a 5-2 front. I think you're going to see Sweat and Reddick on the outside. I think you're going to see Cox, Davis, and Carter inside. To me, that'll be their 5-2 base front. The question is, when they go to more of a nickel front, even if it's a 5-man front, okay, which they played a ton of 5-1 last year with 5 DBs. So the question there is Jordan Davis part of that on a regular basis, or is he not? That's the big question, because his development has to be such that he becomes part of that.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. And that's what they have Milton Williams for, just in case he's not ready for it yet.
And I
because,
think
again,
Milton
that's
Williams
a nickel look. Yeah.
pretty good, by the way. And the question is, does Derek Barnett even, does he make the team? Is there a place for Derek Barnett? Or is he really, who knows? And by the way, 7th round picks obviously are always crapshoots, but I thought Moro Ojomo was way better based on his Texas tape than a 7th round pick.
So let's also talk about the other question then up front is what do they look like in their 4-man fronts when they want to rush the passer? Because they've got so many guys. They can have line 1, line 2, line 3. Do they want Jalen Carter right away to be part of the 4-man rush? Or do they want to be able to move one of those DNs like Brandon Graham inside so they can keep Reddick and Sweat on the edges with Cox inside?
I think the two wild cards as to their 4-man front, Geoff, are Graham and Derek Barnett. Because theoretically, Derek Barnett's a pass rush. Theoretically, okay? Yes. And we know he's coming off an injury, but I mean, that's what he was drafted to be. He's had moments because, Fletcher Cox is still here. Is he going to play in the 4-man front at this stage of his career? How many snaps is Jalen Carter going to play? They've got a lot of players here. But I still think it comes down to Jordan Davis. How many snaps can he play? Is he going to become somewhat or enough of a pass rusher that you can put him out there in your 4-man front? I think these are unanswered questions as we speak in early July.
And they also have Kentavious Street, who's got good snaps over his career. So they've got an interesting rotation on this defensive line. Yep. One thing, Derek Barnett, though, his contract is pretty good for the Eagles. That's why he's back. Our understanding was back in March that they were going to bring him to training camp, see how he looks coming off the ACL, but they planned for him to be on the team. But the point is he's got to perform. He's not a red shirt being paid.
They also had a sack last year against Kenny Pickett and the Steelers early in the game where Reddick lined up as a stand-up 3 technique and actually stunted behind 2 interior defensive linemen, and what we call a long stunt. You may remember the play. So he was actually a stand-up 3 technique. So the question is, does someone like Nolan Smith, if you want to do that at times, does someone like Nolan Smith then line up as an edge player in a front like that? So they've got a lot of options, which we can talk about this for the next hour, and we're not going to know. We've got to get through. We got to get through training camp.
But just to illustrate the depth of what we're talking about, they could have let's say theoretically they had a second string 4-man rush that involved Nolan Smith on an edge, Derek Barnett on an edge, Brandon Graham inside, and Milton Williams next to Brandon Graham inside. That's assuming Nolan Smith is good and Derek Barnett comes back. I mean,
that's theoretically not bad, right?
There are some teams that probably would like to have that as their 4-man rush in general. So
the Bears, the Bears.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
so
we don't know the answer to this. I think Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis are the 2 wild cards because Carter's talent level is extremely high, but he's still a rookie. So, you don't know, is he going to play 25 snaps a game or is he going to be so good that they have to put him out there for 45 snaps a game? We don't know the answer to that.
Definitely. All right, let's go move to the secondary here because one thing Adam and I have been talking about a lot lately, when you hear the 49ers come out and talk about, and they continue to talk about how they lost the NFC Championship game badly, they felt going into that game that James Bradberry was a guy that they could pick on, Greg. I mean, they've been pretty vocal about that in different interviews and podcasts. And this is a guy who had a great bounce back season after getting released by the Giants. I think he made first team All-Pro. But for whatever reason, the Niners felt that maybe the accolades were better than the actual talent. They wanted to attack him deep. They didn't get an opportunity to. When you watched the Eagles last year, and we know about their match carry deliver system that they were doing with Gannon and the Fangio concepts and everything, but did you feel that Bradberry? Did you see anything where you say I can see where they're getting at, where they felt he was beatable down the sideline or deep?
Yeah, I think most people feel that way.
Okay.
Don't forget the Eagles had a great pass rush.
Oh, they had a great pass rush. Yes.
That's a big time deodorant for your secondary.
It sure
but
is.
If you're just looking at Bradberry, the player, I think Bradberry can be beat over the top. Look, the kid from New Orleans beat him over the top. Shaheed, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, Bradberry is a really savvy, really smart player who understands concepts. He's really good in zone. He knows how to read routes. but he's not a transition, change of direction, turn and run guy. That's not who he is. That doesn't mean he's a bad player, but yes, if you set it up properly, and we know the Niners are a team that is with Shanahan are very, very good at those kinds of things. Obviously, it didn't play out in that game because Brock Purdy got hurt. And whether it would have played out, you never know. You don't know those things. But, as you game plan, that's what you look at. You look for little things that, hey, if we set this up, we can go after a certain guy. It doesn't mean a guy is a bad player. There are very few players in the NFL, you would say, they don't have something that is a flaw or a weakness that a team feels they can attack. This is not a knock on James Bradbury saying he's a bad player, but his game is not built on his ability to flip his hips, turn and run with speed. That's not his game.
Right. So obviously opponents, if the Eagles pass rush falls off a little bit, I mean, that's where they're going to try to hit the Eagles down the sidelines. Yeah.
Sure. Pass rush is, like I said, I mean, the Eagles had 70 some, I think maybe even 80 when you count the playoffs. And I would say 85% of them came from their defensive front players. They were not a heavy blitz team. They were able to impact the quarterback with their defensive line.
Greg, we were talking to John DeFilippo, former Eagles quarterbacks coach, over the weekend, and John said, listen, when you play against Fangio, you're not going to get blitzed a lot. They make you, because your hope is you can get home with 4 or 5 rushers, and you just kind of matriculate the ball downfield. It's hard. It's really hard. If you don't protect, it's a problem.
I don't know if Flip said this, but the thing about a Fangio, which Sean decides from that school, is they show you something pre-snap, and post-snap it's not the same. So what they're trying to do there, and this relates to pass rush, is if you just cause the quarterback, no matter how veteran or smart he is, just to hesitate for, a beat, fractions matter in the NFL. You get a quarterback to hesitate for a beat in what he's seeing, and he's just uncertain as to, hey, I thought I had this pre-snap, but now I don't, and now I've got to go somewhere else. Yeah, the great ones, maybe they do that, but still, that's what you're hoping, that you just cause some hesitation for the quarterback, and then you impact him with the rush. Because don't forget, the impact of the rush is not always a sack. It can be just you speed him up. You get him to play faster, and he doesn't see it the way he should be seeing it.
Interesting. You go back and you think the Eagles had 9 sacks last year just against Carson Wentz, and they had 6 in that Tennessee game. They were a dominant pass rush from start to beginning, but there's no question that when you get 70 like they had, there are going to be a couple of games that influence that number and this year they're just playing. Listen, you go from Carson Wentz, who can't move, to Sam Howell, who can move. And then we know about that stretch that they'll have to play after the bye week, where all the quarterbacks have great movement, whether it's Josh Allen, if it winds up being Brock Purdy, he can move around enough. Who else they got coming out of there? Mahomes, of course.
Yeah, he's pretty good.
Yeah. So I just feel like in general, this and Eagles defense has a lot of talent, but because they're rebuilding and because they're playing a different schedule, we're going to have to. We can't just go into the season assuming this is the same defense as last year.
No, and again, there's no knock on the Eagles.
Never is.
Yeah. Football, and you guys know this, is teams now, particularly in the division, but certainly other teams that play the Eagles early in the season, they're spending the off season, working on what the Eagles did on both sides of the ball, and so there'll be different answers. Now, whether those answers are correct, that remains to be seen, but they're going to have different approaches. Maybe that's the better way to say it. They're going to have different approaches, and we'll see if those approaches work. Well, the Eagles coaching staff, they're not stupid either. They know that teams are going to do different things, so they're probably figuring out ways to tweak and expand what they do. That's the chess. That's why football's such a great sport. That's the chess. But it's not going to be the same. Doesn't mean the Eagles are going to be bad, or, hey, they might be back in the Super Bowl. That's not the point, but it just won't be the same.
Right. As we finish it off, Greg, any of these one-year guys who are brought in for depth kind of, tantalize you at all, or have a thought on whether it's a Greedy Williams or Contavious Street, or I'm trying to think of somebody else at the safety level. I mean, I did you do any study on Tristan McCullum coming out of college a couple of years ago? He was a very late pick. I didn't know if you. Okay,
his brother is the guy. Yes, was the 5th rounder for the Bucs, right?
Yes, that was.
The kid, the Sam Houston State kid. Yeah.
I think his name is because of the Z, something, or Zion McCollum. Is that right?
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
The one,
I Greedy Williams is the guy who fascinates me because I did him in detail coming out of LSU, and he's been hurt a lot. But again, he was another one of those LSU big time corner recruits that has really good traits.
Right.
And came out young. Maybe I can't speak to the kid. I don't know that, so I don't want to say anything out of school. But the kid, watching him at LSU, great traits, really poor technique, undisciplined, but really looks the part of an NFL corner and can line up and play man. Now another guy who was a free agent, was another big time LSU recruit and transferred to Alabama where he played 1 year, was Eli Ricks, who, Eli Ricks was a big time recruit when he came out of high school. And, Ricks started for Alabama this past year over the last 7-8 games of the season. He's another long athletic guy. I'd be very curious to see how all that plays out at the backup corner position, because, I just, again, just me, I don't see Zech McPherson, if they had to play him an outside corner for any length of time, I don't know if that'd be good enough.
All right. Great stuff. We have just detailed every NFC East team, finished it off here with the Eagles. It's been a fantastic annual preview series. I don't know if anybody can listen to the series and not think that they know the NFC East like the back of their hand. So for that, Greg, of course, we thank you again. You've been phenomenal. So for Greg Cosell, Adam Caplan, I'm Geoff Mosher. You've been listening to Inside the Birds, the leading podcast in Eagles Intel. And of course, we thank you for flying with us inside the bird.